If you've clicked on this video, that automatically means that you're a fan of Wings. And who can blame you? They were epic and they're painfully underrated today. But the story of Wings is as crazy as some of their biggest hits. Wings could easily have been an embarrassment, and yet they became one of the biggest bands of the 70s, but not in the way you think. It's a story that redefines Paul McCartney and is one of the most unlikeliest comebacks in rock and roll history. Let's get into the full, insane story of Wings, the band that nobody believed in, not even the people in it. By 1970, Paul McCartney's world had collapsed. Fans love to romanticise this era. Imagine Paul living in a cosy farmhouse in Scotland, writing songs like Ram On, just him and his family. But the truth is a little bit different. Think about it. Paul had gone from being in one of the biggest bands in the world to being the man blamed for ending it. He was public enemy number one. He was suing the Beatles after all. But it wasn't all fun and games in Kintyre. He was depressed, drinking heavily, and barely getting out of bed. Linda said he'd stare into space for hours. He didn't want to talk, he didn't want to write, he didn't even want to be Paul McCartney anymore. He'd released 2 solo albums by this point, McCartney 1 and Ram. His first solo album had received good reviews, but Ram was slated by critics, and it would take decades before it became the cult classic that it is today. It was hailed as corny, and it only stung more that John and George were having really successful solo careers right from the get-go. Paul's confidence, the thing that once carried the Beatles, was gone. And so Linda did the only thing that she could. She told him to get up, get out, and start making music again. It was Linda who said, "You need people, you need a band, you need to get back out there." He wasn't going to be a Beatle anymore. He had to start from scratch. Which is madness really when you think about it. And that's where Wings began. The name came to him during the birth of his second child, Stella. He was praying in the hospital for his wife and daughter because of a complicated birth. And the thought of angel wings stuck with him. But let's be honest, the whole idea of it is insane. Paul McCartney, one of the most famous musicians alive, has decided to form a brand new band with his wife, who had barely learned how to play the keyboard, a drummer who was barely out of his teens, and a couple of musicians who had no idea what they were signing up for.
I decided I didn't really want to get together a supergroup of established names, which might have been the easiest option. I thought it'd be better to just get hold of some like-minded musicians who would enable us to grow together.
Paul was determined for the Wings not to be the Beatles. It wasn't going to be 4 lads going up against the world again. Paul wanted to combine his 2 loves, his music and his family. He'd met drummer Denny Sywell and guitarist Henry McCullough on auditions for session musicians during the Ram sessions. Needing one more to complete the lineup, he asked Moody Blues guitarist Denny Laine to join. The band's first album, Wildlife, was rushed. Paul didn't think too much about it. He wanted to get right into the studio as quickly as he could. Reviewers called Wings embarrassing, lightweight, unfinished, and in one particularly brutal comment, the sound of someone pretending to be a Beatle. And this is where you see the real Paul McCartney. Most people after reading comments like that would stop, but Paul doubled down. He took Wings on the road, but to somewhere where you wouldn't expect, to universities. No promotion, no posters, no tour buses. They literally drove around the UK in a van, they turned up at campuses and asked if they could play. It was later called Wings over Universities.
Brody went out and he said, "Hey, we've got Paul McCartney in the band, do you want him to play for you tonight?" The head of the Students' Union was confused and dazed, but he took one look at me, he said, "Oh, yeah, all right."
It's a really crazy idea, but do you know what? It actually started to work. Wings found themselves on stage in real time. Paul was rebuilding his confidence from absolute zero. Linda couldn't play a note of music when she started, but Paul stuck by her, despite what other members might have said behind their backs. Slowly, she started to get it. Nobody had much to say about Wings at first, but the story was about to change, because everything shifted with one song. In late 1972, Paul decided to write a protest track in response to the Bloody Sunday attacks, Give Ireland Back to the Irish, and it got banned everywhere. Give Ireland back to the Irish! The radio refused to play it, TV blocked it, and the BBC called it dangerous. And the controversy worked. Suddenly, Wings weren't a soft rock family band anymore. Now they were kinda cool. They went to work on their second album, Red Rose Speedway, and someone, it was George Martin, managed to blag them the gig of a lifetime, the James Bond theme song. And so came the song that truly changed everything, Live and Let Die.
Live and let die.
It was the first time since 1969 that Paul felt unstoppable again. The song was a worldwide hit and is one of his most iconic songs to date. But Wings as a band was still unstable because the second things got big, the band started to fall apart. So they had 2 albums in the can, they had a couple of hits, and people were starting to think that Paul McCartney was worth listening to again. And then Henry McCullough and Denny Sywell both quit right before the recording sessions for Band on the Run. They both said that Paul was too domineering of the musical direction and that they hated the fact that Linda was included at all. Something that Paul always stood by because Wings were a family band.
The night before we were due to go, Denny and Henry rang up and said, we're not coming. We're not coming to Africa. We don't want to come. We're leaving the band. I said, oh, great, thank you. Oh, God, here we go again. At first it was like, oh no, tragedy. But then, I just sort of thought, right, we're going to go and we're going to show you, we're going to make the best album we've ever made.
And in Lagos, it was chaos. Paul was mugged at knife point with the attacker stealing his demos. He had to rebuild the songs for the album from memory, which actually wasn't that hard for him as he had a lot of experience doing that sort of thing with the Beatles. Another time, he collapsed in the studio from exhaustion, and it was actually due to him smoking weed in this outrageous heat. But none of that matters because what came out of it was Band on the Run, the masterpiece. The album that proved that Wings were real. The album that proved that Paul didn't need the Beatles to be great. Jet, Let Me Roll It, Band on the Run, 1985. It's one of my favourite albums of all time and one that I played over and over again when I was a teenager. It took Beatles melodies and audacity and slotted them right into the mid-70s musical landscape. Critics loved it, fans loved it, it went to #1 in the UK and in America. Paul had done it. He'd finally rebuilt himself. And Wings, which were the band that kinda nobody respected, was suddenly the biggest band in the world. But success could only last so long. The lineup kept changing and band members weren't always happy with the arrangement. It's been said time and time again that Paul used Wings as a name to hide behind when really it was a solo project. He had complete control of the songs, how they sounded, and it's quite understandable if you're hiring top musicians that they would want to pitch in with their ideas for the songs. Paul kept pushing them. More albums, more tours, more songs, and all at a fraction of what the other band members could get as session musicians. In Paul's mind, they took the financial loss so they could be part of Wings. The band recorded Venus and Mars, Wings at the Speed of Sound, and then went on the absolutely enormous Wings Over America tour. For the first time since 1966, Paul McCartney toured the United States. He'd had some issues going over there due to a drug conviction that he had, but now he was back with his new band. The crowds were absolutely insane. Paul was standing in stadiums again, and he couldn't resist pleasing the crowd with a few Beatles numbers. He cried after the first show. But sadly, success comes with a cost. In 1979, Wings toured the UK to warm up for a massive world tour. Everything was set, everything was perfect. And then Japan happened. Paul arrived at Tokyo's Narita airport. He was asked to open his bag. He opened it. Customs found weed. Not a small amount, enough to make it look like he was dealing. Which is insane, but let's roll with it. It doesn't matter. It was enough to get 7 years in prison. He was arrested, locked in a cell, and was isolated from his band and his family. The entire world tour, the huge, triumphant Wings World Tour, was cancelled overnight. It's said that Tokyo was ecstatic for Wings' arrival. They'd had posters up and the songs were playing all over the radio. After his arrest, it disappeared almost like magic. Which is kind of crazy really, someone must have driven round and actually tore the posters down. Japan just did not mess with drug laws, and they didn't care who you were. When Paul was finally freed and sent home, Wings were broken. Denny Laine stayed for a while, but the magic was gone. He released a solo album called Japanese Tears. Now, what do you think to that title? Paul and Linda's children were growing older and they needed more stability. You see, their kids would actually go on tour with them all around the world. But if I'm really thinking about it, I think what really happened with Wings is that Paul just moved on from it. Wings quietly dissolved in 1981. There was no announcement, no press release, nothing. He finally acknowledged Wings were no more though, promoting his fourth solo album, Tug of War. But here's the part that I think people forget. Wings were never supposed to be the biggest rock and roll band in the world. They were never meant to be the Beatles 2.0. They were supposed to be Paul McCartney playing music with his friends and his family.
How did it feel to turn and see Mum by your side?
It was great.
Yeah.
It was really great. Yeah. Beautiful. It was great for me. It was kind of the payoff. That was the crazy idea we'd started in the beginning. What if you're up on stage with me? And even though it seemed like totally impossible, there it was happening.
It wasn't always easy. People quit. People fought. The music wasn't always consistent. They weren't going to be anyone's favourite band, but they released some great tunes, and that's all that matters. It gave Paul McCartney that taste of success that he desperately needed after being labelled as the man who broke up the Beatles. Let's just have a look at some of the songs that they released. Band on the Run, Live and Let Die, Hell on Wheels, Jet, Silly Love Songs, My Love, Let 'Em In, Mull of Kintyre. The legacy of Wings is huge. And I'm glad that with the reissue of this deluxe box set we're getting, that people are talking about them again. But what do you think? Whether you think they were a real band or a name for a solo Paul McCartney to hide behind, you can't deny their legacy. Are Wings underrated? Well, I want it all down in the comments below. If you want more deep dives like this, there are plenty more on my channel. So as always, I'll see you down the road.
We had proved what we set out to prove, which is there was life after the Beatles. Quite amazing to be able to put the whole thing together a second time around and succeed was virtually impossible. But we did it.